Hello, everyone. Welcome back to History Surfer. Or if this is your first time, welcome to History Surfer. This is Dr. A. And as you can see today, we are discussing the Renaissance. So let's look at what caused this to happen and why in Italy. First of all, we have to imagine that this was an amazingly exciting time for people as they began to rediscover the texts of ancient Rome and Greece. Renaissance means the rebirth of classicism. The reason why this happened was the Ottomans, and you can see here on the edge of this slide, over on this side right here, the Ottoman Empire had emerged. But before that, that was the Byzantine Empire. And the Byzantine Empire had preserved all of those ancient texts. When the Byzantine Empire fell to the Ottoman Empire, those texts were taken and moved to Italy, specifically here, right up in this area, in the Republic of Florence. It's a new spirit that questioned the legitimacy of some of the things the church had been doing. It's not that they were leaving Christianity. It's just Christianity, the institution, I should say, of the church had become corrupt. There was a new philosophy about what was happening that was based on humanism. In humanism, we see that the idea is called man is the measure of all things. This is the beginning of modernity, people. And the people of the Renaissance would self-consciously give themselves that name, and they would call their era the Renaissance. Artists of the period began to be seen as individuals, and the arts such as sculpture and painting began to be seen more as they were separate from the church. They weren't just there to adorn the church. So it's a really exciting time. And Italy was in a unique position to see the rise of this movement because they had achieved political stability, and they also had the most contact with the East, and they had the evidence of antiquity all around them. They had a growing middle class, and they had wealth, and this enabled them to obtain patrons, the artists, when I say them. So let's start by looking at the early Renaissance. It is definitely benefited by the patronage of the Medici family, and Cosimo de' Medici, as the head of the Medici family who came to power after the tumultuous events that happened in the East, as well as the Black Plague. I mean, they would have probably never gotten to this position if it hadn't been for the plague. They were bankers and weren't accepted in society. But Cosimo saw the importance of art, and he saw the importance of making a legacy for his family. He gave that spirit to his son Pietro, who then passed this on to Lorenzo the Magnificent. All of their collecting of art would create the foundation of the Uffizi Museum in Florence. And so you really do look at Florence for all of these things that are happening. What Cosimo is going to start is the completion of Santa Maria del Fiore, also known as Il Duomo. Il Duomo had been started early in the Gothic period in 1296, but it was altered in 1366 to include an octagonal dome on the eastern end. So that is here. That's the dome, all right? And while they had started that, they did not have a technical solution to spanning the immense interior space of this cathedral, and that would not be solved until Brunelleschi did it. What he's going to do is going to amaze everyone in Florence as he proposes the idea of an inner dome and an outer dome. Guess what? He went and saw the Pantheon. Can never forget that building and its influence on what emerges in Western architecture. Brunelleschi begins adding the dome, and his idea, while it was in question many times, was eventually very successful. If we look at Il Duomo, that simply means the cathedral, we're going to see that it is the biggest building in Florence, and it also proposed many problems. Because of the size, it was very difficult to get the material up and down there because it was so closed in. And so they had to really reinvent ideas. In fact, Brunelleschi is going to be one of the first people to use the idea of a blueprint. And so he's just revolutionizing architecture. I can't say that enough. So when we see that giant dome, and when we look closely at the structure, obviously the front is Gothic, but as we move to the back, we see that it is Renaissance, and that's because of the dome. We have never seen a dome like this in the Gothic period. The giant lantern on the top is where he closes that space that in the Pantheon is called the oculus. And that is where you can walk up to, actually, on the inside of the dome. I'll show you how that works. So it is a magnificent show of power for Cosimo de' Medici to have this building completed under his auspices. As you can see here inside, you can see here how they are constructing this dome. This dome is simply an outer shell, but it's the inside that's structural. And he took a lot of risks building this thing. Walking up the interior, you can actually see some of the complexity of the dome. The climb to the top of the dome is 463 steps. And once you get up there, you can climb all the way up to the lantern. And there you see that beautiful view of Florence. Florence is a beautiful place. The color of Florence is so Tuscan, with that red clay. It is a giant structure. It is the symbol of early Florence. In the interior here, you can see some of the Gothic parts to it. And as we look up into the dome, we can see how he managed to create this octagonal, almost cantilevering out dome that then again ends up there. When you're up there, you can look down and you see the magnificent interior with the beautiful floor. This dome is what would influence many other high Renaissance actually, but it's basically the second part, if you will, of the Pantheon in the East. No, I'm not talking about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but I put this in here because I had someone ask me one time, why did they name the artist after the turtles? My response being time is backwards in your head, and I had to explain that to this person. The turtles are named after the artists. And in the early Renaissance, Donatello provides the step into the modern period. He worked for the church. He did a lot of sculpture, and he was a sculptor. I didn't say that, but he was. Brunelleschi is considered the first architect of the modern period, and Donatello is the first sculptor. But he challenged the idea that architecture dominated sculpture, and sculpture just was in service to it and had to be on there. And so he will take the unbelievable step for some people of taking sculpture off the building and doing the David for his first life-size freestanding piece of sculpture since the fall of Rome. He's very different from anything else we've seen that came before because he's nude. He uses contrapposto. It is in bronze. It's a cast piece. And the David would represent this new age. He also represented Florence because he challenged ideas of the ancient church. He is, as you can see, quite feminine looking. It was something that Donatello did deliberately, and a lot of people found it to be very offensive. But he does represent this period of taking control. The youth we see here is standing on or resting his foot on, I shouldn't say standing on, resting his foot on the head of Goliath. And that is, the challenge had been met. In other words, Florence had taken control. It's a very beautiful piece. It's very, very well crafted, and it represents something else too. It is an image that would have been not unusual to see in Florence, a youth that looked like this with the hat and the long hair, not nude, don't worry about that, walking around Florence. So now we're going to see this idea take hold of, you can represent people from the past as people from the present, because man is man. The people of the past were just humans. I mean, that's humanism. And you can see here he gently rests his foot on the head of Goliath, which he'd cut off. The three in this first initial early Renaissance period, and Botticelli, again, is a little bit, he kind of bridges in between the early Renaissance and the high Renaissance. But I put him here because he had such an influence on the way people used color and the idea that you could paint portraits. This was new. And he is one of the greatest draftsmen of any of the Renaissance people. He had this ability to make these absolutely beautiful images with color that just astonished people. And here you could see an early commission for a portrait for money. And yes, people worked for money. They didn't, when people say, oh, the art, my art, I can't work for money. Everybody's worked for money in the past. It's not something new. Botticelli's luminous Madonna, sorry. I'm thinking of another image. Shows her for the first time as a real female. She's beautiful. And also look here, she reads. And notice finally the baby Christ. For those of you who have followed through this class or in my class, Christ was not presented as a baby during the the Middle Ages. Okay, we're not going to see him that way until we get here. This is the moment. The beautiful hair, the rays of the sun, the divine coming down on her, and this beautiful formatting, the tondo, that round formatting. It's a very intimate feeling, and we just get that feeling like we're in there with her. The Madonna is beautiful. The baby is a baby. And here they're set in Florence. Well, it's in Tuscany for sure. I can tell you that because of the color. So again, that idea that the past and the present can be conflated because we are all human. Botticelli's images also included mythological stories. Here's Venus and Mars. But where he really masters this is in the Birth of Venus. She is the first nude painting, large nude painting. And he uses her as a way to show that she represents love, and also this combination of Christian ideas with pagan ideas. And so we start to see this kind of blending of these two ideas. If you don't know how Venus was born, she was blown to shore on the zephyr winds and welcomed by spring. She is considered one of the most beautiful women in art. Look at that beautiful hair. And it's not sexual. It's a very sensual image with the way the hair curves on her body. And, it's very beautiful. And I know I'm overstating the word, but she is. Look at the hair color and the way her neck, which is actually too long, but the way it gracefully tilts over. It's one of the most admired pieces of art in art history, and it's also copied a lot. Show you a couple of these copies so you can see, it's been imitated, it's been spoofed. Here's cats, here's dogs, here's rabbits, and look who this is, Beyonce. It's just lovely. And so we are in the throes of the Renaissance, and we're transitioning into the High Renaissance period.